What is the job of the US government? Good evening, dear friends. I'm Sebastian Gorka, and this is your reality check. Really, as the founding fathers planned it, federal government should be irrelevant. We are a republic of states. Apart from some aspects of interstate commerce, the only thing that really should be happening in the nation's capital is national security, is providing for your safety. As we approach just days in front of the 20th anniversary of the greatest terror attack in modern history, are you safer under the Biden administration? No, you're not. This administration has betrayed you. As we've seen in the last few days, there is chaos in Afghanistan. After 20 years of fighting, more than 20,000 Americans killed or wounded, we have left that nation with our tail between our legs. It was chaos. It was a surrender followed by a bombing that killed 13 of our service members. How did this happen? What is the possible explanation, given the fact that we have spent $60 million a day for the last 20 years to nation build that country in Central Asia? For those who took the time to investigate and to do a little bit of reading, none of this should have been a surprise to any of us. I went to Afghanistan. I wasn't a service member. I'd left the British Army long ago, but I went as a civilian at the invitation of NATO, 5 years into the global war on terror. That's me at the Soviet tank graveyard just outside Kabul. And I traveled far and wide. I visited 4 different provinces, and I got to understand the culture of this benighted piece of real estate, the religion that influences the culture. Here, a mosque in Afghanistan with a woman fully covered up head to toe, begging outside this beautiful mosque. But most interesting of all was what I found out about our investment, the US taxpayers' investment. I went to the US Academy we had built there to train our Afghan partners. Got a wonderful briefing from this major who unbelievably, yes, straight out of Central Casting, his name was Major Strong. A beautiful PowerPoint presentation of how many NCOs, how many officers we had trained in the Afghan army, photographs of their graduations. And something didn't sit right with me. So I signed a waiver. I said, yes, I can leave the base, and if I get blown up or shot, that's on me. And I did a little bit of first-hand due diligence. And I found out, for example, just one little data point for you. Out of the thousands and thousands and thousands of Afghans we trained, as soon as they graduated, as soon as they received their last wad of US dollars, their per diem on graduation day, more than 40% of them just upped and disappeared back to their tribal areas. Not serving the federal government, but serving the militias and the warlords that they'd grown up in service to. And that's how the government in Kabul collapsed in 10 days after Joe Biden said, we're out of here and you are on your own. What does it mean for all of us? Is the war truly over? Let's talk to one of the true strategists alive today, a man I highly respect from Stanford University's Hoover Institute. He is the author most recently of The Dying Citizen, Professor Victor Davis Hanson. Welcome to the Gorka Reality Check.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with the basics. You have written seminal works, dozens of works on the history of warfare from ancient Greece to World War II and beyond. When you hear the CENTCOM commander this week, when you hear politicians in the cabinet declare that we won the war, I, as you know, an amateur by comparison to you, I look at wars ending in a very few handful of scenarios. You surrender or you win, and the enemy is destroyed or capitulates. Did any of those happen? What is the correct description for the events of the last few days, Professor Hansen?
Well, war is a continuation, as Clausewitz said, of politics by other means. So we look at the political situation on the ground when the war is over, and who is in control of Kabul. Is it an American-affiliated national Afghan army and a constitutional system? No, it's the Taliban that was there in control when we started. So obviously the 20-year effort, admirable though and idealistic though it was, it ended in catastrophe. We lost. And it wasn't just catastrophe. Everybody thought that it was not going to be viable the last few years, so we wanted to get out. But Joe Biden and the military thinks that because they got out, and most people wanted to get out, therefore it's a success. But the getting out hinged on, could we leave a viable government? Could we have air support? Did we have to do what we did? And the answer was no. So we left. The military disputes the $85 billion in equipment. They say some of that was training, as if when they price their own weaponry, they don't count training or overhead costs. But we left a sizable amount of equipment there, probably as much as we've given Israel in 50 years. Probably could have built 7 fleet carriers.
Let's look at that, Professor. We have this unbelievable diagram of the weapons that were left there, U.S.-funded weapons. The Taliban now has more Black Hawk helicopters than any of our NATO allies. Given that we are just days away from the 20th anniversary of 9/11, the fact that they have 65,000 military vehicles, 600,000 small weapons, all the training we've provided over the last 20 years, in comparison to 20 years ago, is the Taliban, is the global jihadi movement not stronger today than it was before September the 11th?
It's materially much stronger, and it's psychologically and spiritually even much stronger, because now it's coming off the fumes of victory. And it's going to be an international haven for people who hate the West in general, the United States in particular. And they're going to say, these people know how to defeat the West. They defeated America. I want to go there. They have all these weapons. And it's also what we didn't do. I mean, if it was worth $80 billion, that's a fantastic amount. That's 6 fleet carriers, 6 or 7 of them. That's 1,000 F-35s. That's a staggering amount of money. We just talked so casually, Sebastian, of 50, 60, $80 billion. But somebody was responsible either for bringing them back or confiscating from the Afghan army or destroying them so they wouldn't. Nobody talks about that. When the general said to us that the Taliban and the United States have similar goals. We both want U.S. forces to leave by August 31st and do it timely and quickly. I thought, no, if that is our mission, we want to get out with dignity, without damage, and with order and sobriety by the 31st, or maybe even afterwards. But that wasn't the Taliban agenda at all. They wanted us to get out in humiliation, in shame, in death and destruction, and we did. So for the military now, suddenly to say after 20 years, this was an existential enemy. You can't trust them. And now all of a sudden we're partnering with the Taliban. They have the same agenda as we do. You almost get the impression that there's several hundred Americans there, and that the $80 billion in material weaponry and goods was not enough of a bribe to keep the Americans alive that we didn't bring out, so that we're probably talking about concessions, monetary or otherwise, that we're going to still extend to the Taliban in hopes that we don't have 1,000 Bo Bergadals popping up all over the country.
And what is the ramification for not only our relations with our allies, such as within the North Atlantic Treaty Alliance, but our partners, those who aren't formal treaty allies, but are being intimidated by countries such as China and Iran? What are the long-term consequences of the last week's decision to surrender Afghanistan?
Well, they don't over-argue. They don't try to be pseudo-sophisticated. They don't try to draw on all these theoretical what-ifs and according to that. They just simply look at the law of the jungle. I'm talking about the Philippines, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and Australia, and they do it because they know the nature of China, and China is afraid of strong powers that deter them, and it has contempt for people that they deem weak. The United States is not weak. We're the greatest military, economic, cultural force in the world today. But the Chinese look at us and say, with all of that advantage, and they still do not perform, then that makes them even more weak. Sort of like the United States in 1941, when the Japanese said, my God, if we were in the United States, we'd be doing all sorts of things. So when you lose the sense of deterrence and you have the material capability, it's a force multiplier. So I'm very worried because I think the Chinese will do something stupid, either intimidate Taiwan or move on it, or do something, unleash North Korea against South Korea, or start going into the waters or airspaces of Japan. And they feel that with Joe Biden, they can take that graduated gamble. And they thought that with Donald Trump, we called him pathological and crazy. The Chinese called him unpredictable, as did the Taliban. So they thought, well, he wanted to get out, but he left 2,500, and given the fate of Soleimani or ISIS in Syria, this guy is capable of doing anything at any time. And what we call unpredictably as bad, they look at unpredictability as a form of deterrence. So it was no accident that they did not act until Joe Biden gave clear signals that he wanted out at any cost.
As the Chinese curse states, may you live in interesting times. And America right now does, thanks to the betrayal not only of our own American citizens, but also our allies and our friends across the world. The book is The Dying Citizen. Get it right now. We have been talking to the preeminent strategist, Victor Davis Hanson.